the activities of this, since this is being completely funded with private donations by the North Canton Playhouse, we certainly have played a role in approving different segments of the plan in terms of the architect and the bidding process and things like that. So have some information, but not all the details. Certainly any issues this board has with it, we'll certainly take it right back to them and their architects and get that remedied. So.
Okay. Martin, you have any comments?
A couple. So we've done the review on that, and the proposal seems to be consistent with the ordinance and the zoning code. I would like to point out, though, unless the applicant objects, this applicant is being considered as the general development plan as well as the final development plan. That is an exception in the ordinance that allows us to consider these both and not require them to come back with a final development plan.
Okay. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments?
Yeah, where's it going to be put? Where is it going to be on that map?
If you'd please come to the podium to ask your questions, otherwise it doesn't get picked up for the
Need
recording.
your name too, please.
Thank you, ma'am.
Where is it going to be?
Mr. Caplia is going to be providing a presentation on the project to give an overview and give the details of what's being considered.
Could you state your name and your address, please, for the record?
510 10th Street, Northeast.
Thank you, ma'am.
My name's Joe Caplia, architect, Uniontown, 11700 Cleveland Avenue, Uniontown, Ohio. We have been working with North Canton School Systems and the North Canton Playhouse Group in developing this project. Basically, and again, I should have scanned these and I could have given them to you, put them up on the projector. But I've got just a number of prints here, and I will show them to the audience then too. But basically, to show where our addition is going on, and again, it's right adjacent to the existing auditorium. We are basically adding a couple lesson rooms. We are expanding the scene development rooms, storage for costumes. That's basically makes up the under 4,000 square foot floor plan that we're increasing. And it's on the, and I did it two places here. This shows where it is in relation to the existing auditorium. The existing auditorium is in yellow. The little red area is a storage area, like I say, under 4,000 square feet. But to make a bigger impact, and I'll show you in just a minute, to make a bigger impact, our addition is basically 1% of the size of the total complex. This is my key plan, so it's the scale, but a small scale. This little red space right here is our addition. The rest of this 300,000 plus square feet is our proposed addition. And again, here, I have this small little area here. It's on the south side of the building. And from 7th Street, we're basically, I'm going to say, 670 feet off of 7th Street, where the front edge of that addition is located. I want to give you some idea of how far back it is. And I brought a picture, too, of what it looks like initially, and then what we're showing there. The project includes new seats at the auditorium. Currently, there's a flat level with there's chairs on it, movable chairs, and then there's a work area so that, again, students can use it, and then it's also for presentations. And I've been to performance there over the years. Walsh used it at different times. A North Canton group have used it, and it's just not conducive to true theater. So now they're looking at picking up all new seats in the area as far as putting in new air conditioning, upgrading the units there. And as I talked about, the 2 lesson rooms, the scene shop. An important part of the program is what they call their black box, which is their rehearsal space that they practice, or they can use the stage and then they can use this other space too. And then the major portion of that is costume storage. Again, as we talked about, the existing building is, I'm going to say, greater than 300,000 square feet in area. Our building addition is just under, I'm gonna say 3982 to outside the walls as far as the addition. From a building height standpoint, our main building goes up to where the, to a 47-foot height, and our building addition, which matches the adjacent structure, is 18 feet tall. So everything that we have is fitting in, and I'll show again when I get to the elevations. So we're matching the existing building. The overall site plan, we talked about the 600 feet back. As far as the amount of area that we are disturbing on the site, it ends up being about 0.18 acres of disturbed. That's not just building, that's just a disturbed area, reconfiguring some of the landscape around the building. With the floor plan, and again, just for ease of recognition, the yellow area outline is the perimeter of our remodeled area. It basically is the existing stage or theater area. The stage, the only thing that's happening there, we're getting new technology with lighting, refinishing the floor. That's pretty much what's happening in that area, and I talked about the new air conditioning. We have the renovated scene shop, which is basically twice as large as what the existing one was. We have existing toilet rooms, here green rooms, which are basically getting a coat of paint, and that's it. And then you can see here we have an office, and then our 2 lesson rooms, and then our black box, which is again our practice area, and then the biggest chunk of our addition is classroom storage. We're picking up some ADA requirements in there as part of this. We talked about the new HVAC at the auditorium. Gary Cohen, our fire marshal, did ask if we could pick up and rectify a couple of sins that were left over from years ago. At the existing building, before even the original auditorium was added, there were a few old windows that were intact. And instead of taking them out and blocking them up to create a fire separation, they just put a sheet of drywall over it. So he and I spoke, and we picked that up as part of the, as one of his concerns, as making that closure to that part of the project. All right. From an exterior elevation standpoint, again, what I tried to do is I highlighted the existing building in yellow, I mean the base, the walls, and the sun and the top. And in all the cases, our addition matches that 18-foot height, not larger, not less. And then we're picking up the dry-vent band, synthetic plaster band that goes on that part of the building. We're picking that up around the whole perimeter of our addition. So again, the intent is once the project is done, it should look like there was never an addition put on. We should match up everything that's on there, and it shouldn't look like there's anything different on that. Now, the other thing that I added on this sheet, I took a picture of the location, and you can see the banding and stuff, which we will continue. It's a little bit dark, but the reason I bought this is I wanted to show you the landscaping. Martin gave me a heads up. He said that the committee on past projects have been bringing up landscaping as a need and as a requirement. And we checked with the school, and they really have no landscaping there now. We've got a couple of old trees. These couple of trees are going to be coming out because of the project. But we don't have any new landscaping going in because it's maintenance and it's extra cost. So again, I'm just sharing. Marty, he warned me that could be a consequence that comes out of the meeting, and if it is, we have to deal with it. But the school board would rather not add that for more work, more cost.
If you would, could you show a couple of those to
Oh, I'm sorry.
to the
I will do that.
folks in the back so they'll see it as well? Thank you, sir.
Okay. We'll do here first. guess I just ask if there are any questions, comments from the board.
Any further comments from the, questions or comments from the board? I think, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Caplia, what is the proposed construction schedule for this project?
During school vacation, they are anticipating getting in there. I'm going to say, we have a couple of different dates. I know that there's a May 15th early start, and then there's a later start because of events going on at the school. And we have an later August date, and then a September date that we have to meet to complete it. So that's summer vacation.
And this is probably a question for Mr. Henney, but the applicant is the Board of Education, but the user is the North Canton Playhouse. What is the relationship that exists between those two organizations? If you can explain that, please.
So in the 1990s, in preparation for the completion of the unified Hoover High School, at that point in time, a financial donation was made, you could argue if it was a donation or not, for two 20-year leases by the North Canton Playhouse. They executed their second 20-year lease approximately 2 years ago, so they've got about 18 years left on that. And so that's the lessor-lessee type relationship for the past 22 years.
Great, thank you.
One thing though, Mr. Volas, from my understanding though, some of the spaces are still going to be used.
Correct, and there's some dedicated space. We'll still function as the owner per se.
Okay.
If and when we ever reach the end of the lease.
Right, okay. I just wanted to clarify
I
that.
appreciate that, thank you.
Any other questions? I think before we take a vote on this issue, we need to drop to the conditional use permit and get that, because this becomes a moot point if that is not approved. So we'll hold off the vote on the development plan till we have consideration of the conditional use permit.
Mr. Fleckner,
Yes.
do we need a motion to table the conversation while we're dealing with
Oh, I
something
think
else on
we
the
just
agenda?
leave it. I don't know that we need to table it.
Okay.
Just, and the reason for the conditional use permit is this, the school is on R70 zone land, and that is what triggers the conditional use permit. Tim or Martin, you want to? Go ahead.
Sir, before we begin, because conditional use permit is an adjudication hearing for anyone that believes that they're going to speak and offer evidence into the record for the board to consider in making its decision, if we could have the clerk swear you in. Or the court reporter, if you would.
Do you swear that the testimony you are about to give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you.
Okay. I don't, anything further to add because of the conditional use?
I guess the only thing I'm going to say is that basically, our conditional use is for school system, and again, we're adding to the school system for the project. I know Martin and I had discussed that possibly as a long-term solution to not have to address this exception to go through the conditional use is to look at doing it similar to what Walsh had done over the years, is to go to a P&I district. But that would be a zone change, and that would take longer than what we can accommodate as part of this. But we had talked about that may be a potential solution to the long term of having the R70 district. Thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up later, and I would certainly leave it up to the school. Certainly, public education is permitted in R70, but if you want us to do that, I would offer that the Planning Commission would instigate that zone change. I mean, it's consistent with how the land is currently being operated, and we could have the public hearing on that at our next scheduled meeting. But I certainly, that would save you the hassle and the bother of submitting the zone change request. The Planning Commission would do that on your behalf. So if you would let Martin know.
And actually, Mr. Chairman, I might add that, there are a number of other schools in the city that probably could benefit from that same scenario, so maybe we evaluate
look at the zoning
others.
map, Martin, and see if other schools are impacted in the same fashion?
Yeah, that's a great idea. I would like to
Good point, Jamie.
be able to clean up the zoning map a bit further.
Right.
One caveat, though, kind of further on what Mr. Capley and I talked about is, in the parks and institution zoning, there is essentially the conditional uses and the permitted uses, and the caveat is if that proposed use is within 300 foot of a residential district, it's still a conditional use permit, unfortunately. But if say the school activity in this case is further than 300 foot from the residential zone district, then it's a permitted use outright.
Yeah, I would ask Martin to provide the school with what's involved in the P&I district. If there are other restrictions or concerns that may develop down the road, make you aware of that, so before you make the decision whether you want us to proceed with the zone change.
And Mr. Van Gundy and I earlier today were looking at, there's actually a small handful of parcels. I believe there's one that's quite small, and perhaps a replat to bring all of these together, that North Canton High School is perhaps on one single parcel instead of having a couple of those.
Yeah, excuse me, and that would be one of the other nuances with the zone change. I mean, currently several of the parcels, actually all of the R70 parcels, are non-conforming to the R70 use anyway. The parcels as situated, some of those would also be non-conforming in the parks and institutions, where if you did that plat to merge all those parcels, it would then be conforming to the zone district. But that's certainly at the school's discretion if they so choose to do so.
Also help by making property lines go away and making setback distances less
Right.
That just happen around the perimeter, not in the middle of everything.
Thank you. Yes, from a building code perspective, there are benefits as well to the plat.
So if you want to take that under consideration, let Martin know if you want us to proceed.
I'll follow up with you tomorrow if that's okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
In fact, the track and ball field is currently P&I, and that's the only part of that property up there. So let us know. So let's proceed with the conditional use permit. Anybody from the audience have any comments? Any questions or comments of the commission?
I would move that we approve the conditional use as requested.
Is there a second?
So I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Volus?
Yes.
Mr. Sierra?
Yes.
Mr. Delpaz?
Yes.
Mr. McLeister?
Yes.
Mr. Fleckner?
Yes. Okay, we're now back on improvement, or the approval of the development plan. As Martin had indicated, it is a preliminary and final combined. So Any further discussion on that? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the development plan as submitted.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Willis?
Yes.
Mr. Sarah?
Yes.
Mr. Del Paz?
Yes.
Mr. McLeister?
Yes.
Mr. Fleckner?
Yes. Okay, gentlemen,
Thank you very much.
communicate with Martin, and we may be back at our next meeting. Next, final item on our, well, not final item. Next item on our agenda is a zoning amendment to section 117102. Superintendent of permits and inspection of the city's codified ordinances is to replace the superintendent's reporting official from the city engineer to the director of administration.
And I believe I can help with that in that this amendment actually appeared in two spots in our codified ordinance, one within the section for planning and zoning and the one under our general ordinances. Council has already amended the one under general ordinances, and it's pretty much verbatim as what you see here, but since it falls under planning and zoning, our requirements is to bring this before the board for its recommendation, and it's pretty straightforward. It's simply changing as written that the superintendent of permits, as direct reporting official, would be the director of administration instead of the city engineer.
Thank you, Tim. Any questions from the audience? Comments or questions from the planning commission?
A question for Mr. Fox. So is there like an organizational chart that we can look at to see how this fits into the rest of the city's government administration?
I don't have one with me now, but I could provide that to you. But what this does, at one time, the building department, that's actually where the council office was down in the Civic Center. And as part of trying to provide a one-stop type of service for permits, there's been the reconfiguration of the building, and this was something I think that was somewhat overlooked as far as the reporting official, because as the city's attorney, I'm often buried in the code and point out some things that wait a minute, I believe the superintendent of permits reports to the engineer, but in practice, that really wasn't the case, and then I had pointed out that, well, our codified ordinance says otherwise, and once we caught that, it wished to rectify it. We found it in two locations, and so we wanted to be clear that the superintendent of permits and inspections, essentially Mr. Van Gundy here, reports directly to the city administrator and not through the engineer. They each report separately.
Thank you.
And since this is a amendment to the zoning ordinance, it will go, our recommendation would be to council, and they would then proceed with, treat it as a zoning amendment.
Yes, sir.
But this started from council.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Yes. Any further?
Is
Go
the
ahead.
current director of administration accepting this?
Yes, indeed. His recommendation.
Any other questions or comments?
I'll make a motion to approve the zoning amendment as stated.
Second?
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Willis?
Yes.
Mr. Sarah?
Yes.
Mr. Del Paz?
Yes.
Mr. McLeister?
Yes.
Mr. Fleckner?
Yes. All right, the final thing on our agenda would be the Housing Council needs, or part of the Housing Council is a representative from the Planning Commission. So we would need to,
If you would make a motion to amend the agenda to include that.
okay, yes.
I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to
Add that.
have this discussion.
Thank you.
I'll
Is there a
second.
All, roll call, please.
Mr. Bullis?
No.
Mr. Sierra?
Yes.
Mr. Del Paz?
Yes.
Mr. McFeaster?
Yes.
Mr. Fleckner?
Yes. Okay, so, since the inception, the representative from Planning Commission to the Housing Council has been the president of the Planning Commission. But as it was set up, the ordinance says it shall be a representative of the Planning Commission. So, is there any recommendations?
For perhaps those in the audience that may not be aware, and any of the board members, that the essential duty of the Housing Council, it actually meets once a year. And what it does is review the new applications for the Community Reinvestment Act. Currently, that program has been terminated, and we only have the active applicants. And the Housing Council reviews whether or not the current applicants for the residential or two, whether or not they continue to maintain the property, because if they vacate the premises or they don't properly maintain the property, the Housing Council is within its authority to revoke the tax abatement. And the recommendations from the Housing Council then are put together with there's a county board called the Turk, but it's a tax incentive council board that meets. And one of the requirements is our Housing Council has to meet in advance of that meeting to provide information for that board, because it's a culmination. It's a group that includes some of our county commissioners, the county auditor, and they travel around and have the local meetings to determine whether or not residential and commercial property tax incentives should be accepted, continued, or sometimes withdrawn. And my understanding is that for the history of North Canton's Housing Council and the CRA program, your Planning Commission President, Mr. Fleckner, has been the representative and actually chairs the meetings for the Housing Council.
Yeah, and unless council takes action otherwise, at the termination of the current properties that have been submitted, that will be the end of the Housing Council unless they come up with a continuation or a new plan. But at this point, I think it's probably 6 or 7 years yet. I think the last one that came on was the apartments up on North Main Street. So upon the end of and theirs was that 15?
I believe.
Oh, so it could be another 12 years or so that they would be reviewing this. Some of them are 10, some are 8, some are permitted 15, so And Housing Council met about a month ago and approved continuation of the current applicants.
Mr. Fleckner, you serve on it currently, correct?
I have until this point. It's a 3-year term.
Do you still want to continue?
I would be willing to do that.
I mean, I guess if you're not willing, I would step in, but I
Yeah.
would like to see you continue since you have been doing it
Yeah, I
for all
would-
these
I
years
would.
and you're very familiar with it.
It's one meeting a year. Early March.
Then I'd like to make a motion that Mr. Fleckner is retained on this council.
Yep, for 3 years. Because everybody had to be reappointed for this year. And I think there's still a vacancy with an appointment that the Housing Council itself, you know, there are 5 or 6 that are designated in the ordinance, and then 2 to be elected by the council itself.
Yes.
Is there a second to that motion?
Yes.
I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Volles?
No.
Mr. Sierra?
Yes.
Mr. Del Paz?
No.
Mr. McLeister?
No.
Mr. Fleckner?
Yes. Is there a motion to adjourn?
You perhaps request to see if there's a second motion to resolve.
Does anyone have an alternate motion?
I'll move to nominate Mr. McLeister.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Volles?
Yes.
Mr. Sierra?
Yes.
Mr. Del Paz?
Yes.
Mr. McLeister?
Yes.
Mr. Fleckner?
No. Now I entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. At this point, you see anything coming before us next month?
Potentially, the Burger King
Oh,